As children of immigrant parents, we often struggle straddling two cultures as we navigate a society that our parents are unfamiliar with. Traveling to a foreign country, immigrant parents bring their strong set of values and expectations for their children. I really believe a lot of the principles and values that they impart on their children enables their children to succeed through grit and hard work. In fact, my own sense of resilience and resourcefulness definitely originates from my parents, and I observe these qualities in many of my friends with similar backgrounds. Although our ability to hustle and thrive in adverse situations is ultimately beneficial for our success, we as a society don't talk often enough about the experiences of immigrant children who also have to navigate cultural clashes as they try to belong in cultures that may have conflicting ways of life. In addition, many with immigrant backgrounds place high standards for their success, but also believe that success almost always entails adversity and pain in order for it to be worth it. Maybe this belief stems from the template of hard work that many of us have observed through our parents working multiple jobs with long hours and little rest. In uprooting to a new country, we're all well aware of what our parents left behind by observing struggles that they wouldn't have faced had they stayed in their native country. Whether it be feeling isolated, leaving their family and friends behind, getting by with a new language, or finding jobs that they would be overqualified for in their native countries. As a consequence, children of immigrant parents are often saddled with guilt and pressure to succeed through constant adversity in order to make their parents' sacrifices worth it. I remember as a child trying not to enjoy things too much, especially when it involved money, because I felt guilty thinking about how much my parents were working and how little time they had to rest, never mind having fun or relaxing. And the stakes are high. You might have paid your way through university, but your parents may have escaped war, poverty, or other social inequities so that you could struggle well in this new country. And you're sometimes left with this feeling that no matter how hard you work, you'll never work hard enough to return this implicit debt that you may owe to your family. This guilt and pressure to be successful, whether implicit or explicit, can be paralyzing. On top of the guilt is the added pressure of meeting your parents' definition of success. Sometimes parents use their children as vehicles to accomplish the goals that they could not accomplish because of their own limited resources. For many, this is in the form of parents pushing their children to become, for example, an engineer or a doctor. But the challenge is that in trying to please your parents and your culture, and trying to make their sacrifices worth it, you can lose yourself in the process, or never really get the chance to even learn who you are to begin with. One of my biggest challenges has been trying to be myself in the midst of family and cultural pressures. Like classic South Asian parents, my parents dreamed that I would become a medical doctor, something I only considered because of the amount of times they would talk about how much it would mean to them. But deep down, I knew being a medical doctor was just not for me. For women also, the culture has a certain perception of how you're supposed to look and dress, and somehow it feels like you're not good enough. You're either too thin or too fat, sometimes you're too dark-skinned, or your hair is not long enough. There is just this constant messaging that somehow you're just not enough, and this can really damage your self-worth. So I would love to share my approach with how I navigated my family and culture, and hope that you could find some of these tips helpful. Tip number 1, stop feeling guilty. Easier said than done, I know, but there's no good that comes out of this prolonged feeling of guilt to match the sacrifices your family has made for you. Your parents and family made the decision they made, and these were their choices. You shouldn't have to seek out a life that one-ups or somehow matches the sacrifices your parents made. Remember that in any loving relationship, people should never hold something against you for helping you, and that good deeds are generally done with no expectation of receiving anything in return. Instead of feeling crippled with guilt, try replacing guilt with gratitude. Acknowledge what your family has sacrificed for you, and use that to make the most of the opportunities you choose to pursue towards a life that is meaningful to you. Tip number 2, know yourself. Learn about who you are independent of your family and culture. This can be especially hard when you're constantly surrounded by your family and culture, but try to find pockets of time to be alone and to express yourself. Ask yourself if what you're doing on a daily or regular basis aligns with who you are as an individual. The biggest period of self-growth for me happened when I moved cities to pursue my graduate studies. I was living alone and used this time to really discover and explore my interests. Sometimes following your family and culture can be the easy thing to do because you don't want to create any problems and you want to be appeasing, but you risk discovering your authentic self. Now, I totally get that it's super hard to accept yourself when you feel that your family, whether close or extended, and your culture is constantly judging you. I mean, we are social beings and we naturally want to fit in and be liked, especially by our own family. But it took me, for example, a long time to realize that I didn't really believe in a lot of the customs that my parents believed in. But that knowledge in itself was very useful for me. Because then I came to realize that as long as I know myself, that's what mattered, and that I actually didn't mind following some of these customs because it made my parents happy, and their happiness actually mattered to me more than the perception that I was a religious person, for example. So, for example, I didn't really enjoy visiting temples and participating in these ceremonies, but I realized that with moderation, I enjoyed temples for their historical significance, an appreciation for the aesthetics, and the beautiful smell of candles and incenses that often greet you when you enter a temple. Sometimes it's a matter of perception, and learning what matters to you could really help shape your experience of activities. Tip number 3. Pursue your interests and iterate as often as possible. There's often a lot of shame in Eastern cultures when you quit and give up on something, but I've learned that it's a skill to discern when to persevere and when to call it quits. You have to be careful that you're not falling prey to the sunk cost fallacy, which is this idea that since you've invested something into a project or idea, whether it be a considerable amount of time, money, or resources, that you have to continue through with seeing the project to the end because of how much you've already put into it. But in reality, if something is no longer serving you, it makes more sense to cut your losses and not continue pursuing it for the sake of just finishing it. If you've started to read a book and you realize 40 pages in that it's totally dreadful, why continue reading when you can just move on to a more entertaining book? Our fear of being perceived as a failure is also a real challenge. But when you're young, you should spend a lot of time exploring your interests, which can really help you determine your interests and find your authentic self. I struggled a lot to do this because my parents had expectations of what I should be spending my time on. So I always made it work so that I could meet their expectations while pursuing my own goals and interests. When I got older, these skills became super handy as I continued to study but managed my time in a way so that I would still pursue other hobbies and interests. Inspiration sometimes comes in unpredictable places, and you might not know at the time, but when you think back on it, you'll come to realize that this seemingly inconsequential choice was actually pivotal in changing your life trajectory. In the meantime, trust the process and follow your interests. I highly recommend David Epstein's book Range, which talks a lot about how some of the successful people we know in society obtained their success by pursuing a wide range of interests at a young age and finally settling on something that they knew fit them well. So unlike common thought, overspecialization could actually be harmful, especially when adapting to a changing world that requires greater diversification. Tip number 4. Communicate through your parents' lens. When I was younger, I felt like I was fighting with my parents all the time to gain their acceptance in order to follow some of my own interests. It was a challenge to get them to support my decisions, and I struggled to get their approval on many things, even small things like spending time with friends or traveling to foreign countries. Every family situation is different, but if it's possible, I encourage you to be patient as you communicate with your family. Your relationship with your family might not be as open as you'd like, and that's okay too. I hope that you find comfort in knowing that you'll find friends that you could be completely open with and talk to them about subjects you're uncomfortable sharing with your family. But if you do feel comfortable, try communicating why something is important to you while acknowledging your parents' concerns and perspectives. In my case, if something didn't have an educational value, it was hard getting my parents to agree to something. So a lot of the times I talked to my parents about how being able to socialize with different groups of people would improve my communication skills, an essential skill to succeed at any job. When I was young, I was obsessed with traveling to different countries, and so I found bursaries and scholarships to help fund my travel, often through school or university, and that usually always had some sort of educational value. I told my parents that this was a great opportunity to learn about different cultures and gain experience working in different countries, which would also diversify my professional portfolio. Speaking to them in these terms really helped them understand why travel was important all around. Remember that a lot of the times your parents might be against something because they're afraid of the unknown or don't see the immediate value in them. So try in helping them to understand the value. We sometimes feel guilty for our own interests because they're not perceived as functional or useful to our immediate success. Sometimes you might not even find a reason except that it seems fun, and that's totally valid too. You shouldn't shun yourself from fun all the time. Play is really important and can help you discover who you are as a person while providing inspiration for the types of things you might want to pursue down the road. We can pursue the profession that our parents asked us to pursue, but at the end of the day, you have to be the person who will have to carry out that profession day in and day out for the rest of your life. So my final piece of advice to you is to believe in yourself while practicing humility. Your parents' fear often pushes them to encourage you to pursue more traditional paths because it's safe and secure. Your parents might express doubt and lack confidence in you because they don't know anything about the thing you would like to pursue. Try not to take it personally and keep believing in yourself. Do this while practicing humility. So what do I mean by humility? Sometimes when our identity is threatened, we can resist everything that comes our way. I know I did this with my family, basically rejecting my parents' advice and guidance even if some of their recommendations actually made sense. I encourage you not to discard your family entirely and listen to what they have to say. Instead of giving a blanket no to everything, be open to receiving your family's feedback and judging for yourself whether it is something you want to integrate or reject. Remember that your parents have a unique set of skills and knowledge that can help set you apart in a society that values diversity. Lastly, practicing humility can be helpful when you don't have a big community of people rooting for you. So believing in yourself means that even if you don't know everything right now, you have the confidence in yourself that you'll figure it out, making errors along the way, which is totally okay, but improving every step of the way, which is the most important thing. If you can relate to some of my experiences, I would love to hear from you in the comments section below. How did you navigate your experiences with your cultures and your parents? Let me know if you would like to learn more about any specific topics in future videos. Please consider subscribing to my channel, and Happy New Year to everyone. I hope the new year brings you more opportunities to express your authentic self.